Look, every minute that passes is crucial, not just here in Turkey, but also in Syria, particularly in those places where there currently isn't any international aid. You can probably see just here behind me in Adana, this is some of the recovery effort that's still underway. People are still buried under this building here. We've been hearing that there have been text messages that have been sent out from people underneath this rubble to rescuers saying, I'm in here, I'm in this apartment, can you please come and get me? Every minute that passes without those people being rescued, it means that their chances of survival are diminishing, and it is bitterly cold here. We've gone through 2 nights of, in some areas, well below 0-degree temperatures. So the cold is a major factor in people's survivability here as well, and it is just an intense and frantic race against the clock. And this is just one building of the thousands that have collapsed across this region, where rescue operators are trying to desperately save and find people.
Allyson, there's been a fair bit of anger from people at the delays, at the lack of resources. Is that a fair criticism, or is it just the scale of the disaster that is overwhelming?
In different areas, I think it is a pretty fair criticism. Here in Turkiye, there has been a massive international aid response. More than 65 countries that have sent thousands of personnel. They've sent heavy equipment, machinery. They've sent search and rescue dogs. People have been sifting through these piles of debris with their hands, going through the twisted bits of metal and the big slabs of concrete. And there are a lot of personnel on the ground. On top of that, there are a lot of civilians that are turning up to try and help as well. We've heard stories of people coming from all over Turkey to come and try and assist in the efforts. There are a couple of things hampering that. One, it's still quite dangerous. It's really dusty, it's really smoky, it's not a safe environment. And the buildings around here, they're damaged, they're cracked from the earthquakes. So the potential for those buildings to collapse is still enormously high at this point, so it's not safe for a lot of civilians to be here. The second challenge is what you had alluded to, just the sheer scale of this. You can see how many people are working on this one building behind me, times that by the thousands of buildings that have collapsed, and you get this real understanding of how there just possibly can't be enough people to cater for all of those search and rescue operations. And then we get into a completely different issue, Syria, the inaccessibility of that northwestern part of Syria, meaning that aid hasn't even got there yet.
So let's talk a little more about Syria. What sort of response are we seeing from authorities, and are they going to get the necessary backup and reserves to respond effectively?
It's a really interesting situation because those areas in northwestern Syria that have been affected are largely held by rebel forces that have been at war with the Assad government for more than a decade. And as I just mentioned, usually the route to get UN aid into that area is through just one crossing point here in Turkey. And that crossing at the moment is currently inaccessible. And the Assad regime has been criticised as trying to politicise this situation because their ambassador to the UN has said that they want all earthquake relief efforts to be funneled through Damascus, and then that they will distribute it to all areas of Syria, which the international community is certainly quite critical of and unfortunately doesn't really believe is going to happen. So I know that there are very serious and urgent conversations happening with rebel forces in the northwestern parts of Syria to try and get aid in there. It's just an incredibly logistically difficult challenge and a politically dicey area as well.
Allyson, Australia is now going to send a search and rescue team, as many other international countries are doing. Is it the case that as many people as possible with experience are needed to be sent to both these areas?
I think anyone would say that help is needed everywhere. Once this initial search and rescue is finished, then they've got to move on to the cleanup. There are so many bodies that are still going to be left under these buildings that will not be found alive. So many people will not be found alive. So there is going to be so much work in so many various areas across both Turkiye and also Syria that this is just going to be an ongoing mammoth operation. And I just wanted to quickly point out one other factor that's at play here, Bev. The extreme cold in Syria in particular. We're talking about an area that is so poor, so impoverished, 1.7 million refugees as a consequence of that civil war in Syria, already living in tents and living in makeshift shanties. All of them are destroyed now, and so they have nowhere else to go, and there's a real risk that there will be further casualties as a result of hypothermia.